There are hundreds of protesters here today on Capitol Hill demonstrating against the confirmation vote of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Yes, they have. You know, Bredesen brings this kind of moderate Democrat to the table, and a lot of people are drawn to that. Good morning from Virginia on what could be a historic midterm election day. What does that look like 10, 15 years down the road? Where many voters have come out to vote early in this year's midterm elections.
12 days away from the midterm elections, and we spend most of our time covering local races. There's great value in casting, though, I think, a wider net, and that's what we're going to do right now. There are 3 regional races that will go a long way to determine if the Democrats retake the House and Republicans hold control of the Senate. And we're lucky enough to have Medill School of Journalism graduate student Beverly Banks with us here on the afternoon report, and she's just back from doing some actual on-the-ground reporting in West Virginia and Tennessee, and so we're calling on her right now to tell us a little bit about what she found. Beverly, it's good to have you back. You're a native West Virginian, so let's begin, first of all, there. The Senate race, Joe Manchin, a Democrat in about as red Republican a state as you can possibly imagine. The latest poll has him up by 16 points.
Yep.
What's going on there?
So it's interesting. My colleagues and I, we went to a forum with Senator Manchin and Richard Ojeda, and he is the congressional candidate for the House in the 3rd District. And so we went there and we interacted with the voters, and we found that they have a lot of support there. So contrary to popular belief, even though the state is very red, Manchin is very popular and has continued to do so through his term.
He was the Democrat who voted yes on Kavanaugh, and now he voted yes after there were enough votes to confirm. But nevertheless, there are plenty of Democrats in that state who said he did what he had to do to get reelected. And let's be honest here, it's all about being elected. You're no good if you're on the outside, right?
That's right, that's right. And one of the voters that we talked to said that she was actually really happy that Manchin voted for Kavanaugh, so I think that did help him there.
You mentioned the race in the 3rd Congressional District there, and that's probably worthy of our talking about. If you're not familiar with the 3rd Congressional District of West Virginia, and you probably have no real reason to be unless you live there, southwestern West Virginia, Huntington, Bluefield, Princeton, and Beckley, it is a 94% white congressional district, and you'd be hard-pressed, I think, to find a lot of places more one color than you do the 4th. What do we see in that race right now?
I think that race has been interesting because the polls are showing Ojeda's the Democrat, and he has led at some points, but Carolyn Miller, the Republican, has also led. So it's really a toss-up at this point, and what we see is Ojeda is a different kind of Democrat than what Manchin is. You know, he's very authentic. He was part of the teacher strike that happened back in February of this year, and he's gained a lot of support through that. So it's not unlikely that he could be elected.
This theme of Republicans and Democrats maybe not necessarily being tied at the hip to the national party runs through all of our discussions here. It's certainly the case with Joe Manchin. It's the case in the 3rd District. It also turns out to be the case in Tennessee.
Yes.
The Senate race there could be very important to the Republicans.
So you see with that race in Tennessee, you've got Phil Bredesen, former governor. He won all 95 counties in his re-election bid in 2006. And then we see in 2016, you know, the state went red. And that's where Marsha Blackburn comes in. A lot of people support Marsha because she supports Trump's agenda.
Again, you have a very Republican state, and yet you have Phil Bredesen, who won all 94 counties, who sort of hews to the line of Democrats who have won in a state that you would think of as being traditionally Republican. Tennessee's been doing this for a while, haven't they?
Yes, they have. You know, Bredesen brings this kind of moderate Democrat to the table, and a lot of people are drawn to that. Although we've talked to some voters who said that, you know, that's his only hope right there is to be in that race and to vote for him. And so it's kind of interesting to see that flip side of, you know, what voters are thinking there.
What's your gut feeling on that in Tennessee? And I know that's a tough thing to ask.
It's a tough thing to ask. You know, I think it's anyone's race, and I think that it's not impossible for a Democrat to win, but I wouldn't count Republicans out, and I wouldn't count out the, you know, the Kavanaugh push that's happened, and some of the other issues that are going on there with education and border security.
Beverly Banks is about to get out of school and go on out and do what we do in this business. And I think wherever she winds up, the folks there are going to be really well served because she has a very sharp eye. And we really appreciate your sharing it with us
Thank you
this
so much, Dave.
afternoon. We're back with more right after this.
I felt like my vote was important and I needed to make it.
I think it's my civic duty.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have a candidate that, or a person in office that will represent Tennessee.
Knox County voters stood in line at Farragut Town Hall and downtown West polling stations to exercise their right to vote. Many voters say they are motivated by policy issues rather than the candidates on the ballot. Elisa Grant cast her ballot for Democrat Senate candidate Phil Bredesen because she believes he will address health care policy.
What are we going to do about the opioid crisis? How are we not going to fuel that? How can we make a stand and make our voice heard with regard to the current administration?
Tennessee voters turned out in record numbers for early voting in the 2018 midterm election this year. Early and absentee turnout more than doubled from 634,000 in the 2014 midterms to 1.3 million this year. Here in Knox County, the vote totals jumped from over 57,000 in 2014 to over 117,000 in 2018. We're here in Knoxville, Tennessee, where many voters have come out to vote early in this year's midterm elections. Now, we're covering the election between Phil Bredesen and Marsha Blackburn. What we've heard thus far is that people are really split on who to vote for, and many of the issues that are concerning a lot of the voters deal with education and border security. Knox County voter Mark Larson said he's voting to stop the political polarization in Washington.
The stuff that's going on in Washington always kind of concerns me because it's so much adversarial and that type of thing. So hopefully we can go ahead and get to a point where it's common.
LaTanya Lee said her disappointment with President Trump's agenda drove her to vote early.
To be honest with you, Washington, Trump, just, I don't know. I just feel like it makes a difference, so.
Early voting ended on November 1, but given the strength of the turnout so far, November 6th is set to be a record election. For the Medill News Service, this is Beverly Banks reporting. So how concerned should the American people be about our security in the Arctic? You know, what does that look like 10, 15 years down the road?
Yeah, I think the Arctic's a tricky place for the average citizen to think about because it's not something a lot of folks are familiar with. But you know, there's about a third of the, or about 13% of the yet to be discovered petroleum on the ocean floor there. There's about 30% of potential, you know, undiscoverable LNG, liquid natural gas. There's $1 trillion of minerals that are highly valuable on our outer continental shelf. So there's some national interest from deriving, you know, economic benefit from the Arctic. There's the Arctic, I think it's you can't argue that there's more water where there wasn't water parts of the year in the Arctic, so there's increasing Coast Guard mission space, there's expeditionary cruises up there. We have statutory responsibility to respond if there was a disaster in the Arctic in terms of some type of an environmental disaster or some type of a mass rescue. So it's a space that just really warrants more national attention. Secretary Mattis was up there this summer, and I don't remember his exact quote, but it was along the lines of, we've got to up our game in the Arctic, and I think the Coast Guard's part of that conversation.
Yeah, we want to talk a little bit about the threat from China and Russia in the Arctic and
Okay.
what that looks like years down the road.
So what I'd say about, you know, China declared itself a near Arctic state, and China has published an Arctic policy. We've seen the Shui Long, that's the Sea Dragon 1, in the Arctic each winter. Each summer here, actually, since 2016, every summer. Before that, about every other year over the course of the last 9 years. So China's asserting its interests, its, you know, through presence in the Arctic, and you know, I think they would make the argument that the Arctic is a commons, and we would argue that, you know, we're an Arctic nation with a outer continental shelf that, you know, contains things that we believe we derive, you know, unique economic stuff from. So it's competitive space in that regard. So I think Russia's investing extensively in the Arctic. They derive about 20-25% of their GDP from the Arctic. They're keenly focused on the Northern Sea Route. You got interesting collaborative arrangements with the Yamal LNG facility off the north coast of Russia. That's, I think, 20-35% financial investment from the Chinese, bringing LNG out of the Arctic a little bit down to China and other parts of the world. So there's a lot of interesting things going on, and I think it's, as Secretary Mattis talks about, you know, cooperating where we can and compete where we must a little bit. I think for us, the Coast Guard is the face of the U.S. government, predominantly in the Arctic. The Navy still does some operations. I consider it as a competitive space.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you
Thank
guys.
you.